Okay. Hello, everyone. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, depending on where you're joining us from. Welcome to our side event. It's called No More Omissions, Addressing the Scale and Ambition Needed to Change Global Food Systems. We are here at COP26 in Glasgow. It's been a lovely day here today, a lot happening, as one might imagine. So we want to speak to you from here. Some of us are in the room, some of our colleagues are in another room, but we are broadcasting from the main Climate Conference Center. And one of the reasons why we're here today is many of us on this panel, that I'll introduce in a few moments, have been working on food systems issues in a variety of ways: food and agriculture and the links with climate change, with equity, with food security, with biodiversity, with social justice. And we see the science case around these issues really, really increasing, strengthening, accelerating. We see interest from the public sector. We see interest from the private sector. We see interest from government, policymakers, researchers, young climate activists, older climate activists saying, we know food systems are crucial to meeting the Paris commitment. We know food systems are crucial to protecting the planet. We know food systems are crucial to reducing greenhouse gas emissions. And yet we don't really see the policy action that the science and the urgency suggests is required. So we're gathered here today to talk to you about some of the science, but really to talk more about what are some of the bold policies, ideas, plans, programs already in place that are addressing food and agriculture from both production and consumption side that intersect specifically with climate, but also biodiversity, social justice, and we could even say climate justice. So I will briefly introduce myself and then briefly introduce the panels. We really look forward to discussion, so please do, when we give you the signal, feel free to let us know you have questions, comments, and we will get to you in a little bit as the panel proceeds. So I'm Mia MacDonald. I'm the Executive Director of Brighter Green. We are a public policy think tank based in New York City. We've been quite active in the COP for a number of years, working on food systems and climate issues where environment, animal welfare, and global sustainability, global development intersect. And I'm really pleased to be joined with a terrific panel. We're so happy everyone could be here in Glasgow through various means to speak today. So we'll have a number of panelists, quite brief presentations, and then we'll have some discussion among the panel and discussion with you. So without further ado, I'd like to start by saying, we do know agriculture contributes at least a third of global greenhouse gas emissions. We know the livestock sector itself contributes at least 14.5% of global greenhouse gas emissions. We also know last week at the COP there were some interesting, quite potentially impactful and groundbreaking commitments around deforestation, around methane, and a number of other issues that are still being discussed here. But we do see agriculture there, but not really as central as it really needs to be, given what the scientists are telling us, given the scale of both the impact on greenhouse gas emissions and the real potential for much more positive, beneficial, socially just, sustainable, climate-compatible solutions. We know, just another quick data point, probably 70 or maybe even 80 billion animals are raised and slaughtered for food, land animals, each year around the world. We know that's a key driver of deforestation. We know deforestation is a key driver of climate change as well. So we're here from different perspectives who care about animals, care about public policy, care about the environment, obviously care about climate. We'll have representatives from youth sector, faith sector, policy. We have government MP with us, research, advocacy. So hopefully a very, very rich set of presentations and a rich discussion. And so without further ado, I'd like to briefly introduce our panelists, and then they will speak, and then we'll open it up for further for discussion and Q&A. So in the order in which they're going to speak, we have, we'll start with a short video from Humane Society International that really looks at this issue of animal agriculture and climate change. But I think before we have the video, let me briefly introduce a presentation so we can then turn right to our first speaker. So we'll have Sabrina Ahmed from the Vegan Society here in the UK. We'll have Honourable Barry Gardiner, who's a Member of Parliament for the Labour Party here in the UK. Honoured to have him here. Juliette Tranchant from ProVeg, an organisation based in Berlin, but global. We'll have Karina Millstone from Feedback, another UK-based organisation. We'll have Nick Robertson from Compassion in World Farming, also based in the UK. We'll have Ashley Yong from the Buddhist Tzu Chi Foundation, an important faith-based organization. We'll have Lana Weidgannon from Zero Hour, youth climate activist, and Brighter Green, the organization I represent, Humane Society International, and ISEE are also partners in this side event. So over to the video, and then we'll get the presentations going. Thanks again for everyone for tuning in and being here.
Take two.
I'm passionate about reforming global food systems for so many reasons, but mainly for climate change. When talking about animal agriculture, meat and dairy production, to people, a lot of times they're not aware of the environmental consequences. Intensive animal farming raises and kills more than 88 billion land animals for food every year globally, emitting huge amounts of greenhouse gas, the same amount as all forms of global transportation combined. Is also responsible for over half of all nitrous oxide emissions caused by humans, which has nearly 300 times the global warming potential of carbon dioxide. By 2050, farm animal production is projected to emit over 2/3 of the greenhouse gas emission levels considered safe. And it has other devastating environmental impacts: deforestation, soil damage, water pollution, and biodiversity loss. Everything we care about depends upon and relies upon a stable climate. Ultimately, you have to address these issues or these issues destroy us. At the United Nations Climate Change Conference, animal agriculture is not on the agenda. Tell our world leaders it's simply time to stop ignoring the cow in the room.
Okay, great. Okay, so we'll turn to Sabrina Ahmed from the Vegan Society.
Thanks so much, Mia. Thank you for having us here. I think it's a really great opportunity to start by talking about why it's imperative that we have food higher on the climate agenda. I think, we've seen some headway during this conference with agriculture being recognised in the Glasgow breakthroughs as a key emitting sector. But I think what we've seen during this conference is that this doesn't go far enough, and we're not actually seeing realistic pathways which will highlight how we will reach the 1.5 degree target. It's widely understood that food production is the world's largest use of land and water resources, is a leading cause of biodiversity and habitat loss, and yet food systems in their entirety have been largely ignored in climate discussion so far. I think at this point we really need to start accepting that radical thinking is required for substantial change. And if we're to overhaul our food system and take the climate crisis seriously, there is no way that we can ignore the need to support a transition to a plant-based food system. The Vegan Society has recently launched the Planting Value in the Food System report, which looks at how a transition to a plant-based food system would help achieve this. And we've highlighted how mitigation of greenhouse gas emissions are possible in various areas of food production and consumption. So what we need is action being taken on both the supply and demand spheres. And in the first instance, what we really need to have and what the report actually calls for are food sustainability laws, which sets targets on how we can actually achieve these ambitions. Food systems reform is actually quite critical to meet most global agendas, such as the Paris Agreement or the Sustainable Development Goals. But I think it's really worth acknowledging that whilst blueprints like these are great and they've been really useful frameworks, there's actually very little accountability for member states to actually meet them. And whilst we've seen some traction in the private sector, there's always this element of picking and choosing what gets adopted. So there's often very limited attention being given to how actions in one sector or one policy agenda actually get integrated with others. And therefore, I think it's really important that we look at the food climate crisis, through a food systems lens, and enforce food sustainability laws, which set out clear objectives for the food system we want to see, and which embed commitments such as the Paris Agreement or Sustainable Development Goals within them. If we're serious about climate justice, these laws will also include binding steps to reduce animal farming as a process to elimination, given that livestock accounts for 1/3 of all human-caused methane emissions and has the highest potential for reduction. So I think this year's COP isn't going far enough. The Global Methane Pledge has been a really welcome announcement, but there's still this reluctance to address the impact that changing diets can actually have. I mean, we've seen so much focus on other emitting sectors such as oil and gas, and yet policies that can support a shift to changing diets or even reduce agricultural emissions are yet to be acknowledged. There's still a lot of progress to therefore be made, and instead of relying on unproven technology or band-aid solutions to meet our international climate obligations, what we need is to start addressing and investing in pathways that will allow farmers to transition away from animal agriculture and start targeting methane as an aggregate issue instead of taking on a selective approach, given the significant contribution that livestock has to the climate crisis. So I think it's also important to address the impact that a changing climate is going to have on the most vulnerable. And I really think it's important to emphasize the role that the global north needs to have in ensuring an equitable, inclusive, just transition for those working in the food system. We have opportunity to take leadership in the space in the global north and enable a transition to fair and sustainable plant-based food systems, with examples of this already happening in places like the Netherlands, who have proposed targets to reduce farmed animals by 30%, or even in Portugal, who have already legislated to ensure at least one plant-based option in all public sector menus. And therefore, they're not only supporting individual behaviour change by familiarising the public with more sustainable forms of consumption, but they're also helping to increase the market for plant protein and therefore help to make it affordable to everyday people. On the production side, I think what we need to see from the climate financing agenda, for example, is greater investment in the research and development of crop protein production, as well as a plant protein supply chain, if we're to move at the rapid pace that's required to ensure that we hit the 1.5 degree target. Innovation requires capital. It's important to ensure that climate-smart agriculture is available to everybody, and we need to ensure that we create market incentives, which will provide opportunities and remove those barriers for farmers to transition to more sustainable forms of plant-based land management. So I think the nature and the gravity of the challenges linking agriculture and food value chains to diets, health, and planetary ecosystems cannot keep being ignored. You know, the case for fundamental transformation of food systems is now irrefutable. And it's quite clear that so far this COP has only showcased ambition, but we need to go a lot further in terms of what we actually deliver and highlight solutions that will sort of enable us to implement this when it comes to food systems in particular. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sabrina, for that very comprehensive vision, and also for reminding us about the equity issues and you know, there's massive hunger still in the world, and we've seen COVID exacerbate some of that, and the real inequalities, and how are we organizing ourselves to really have a more just and sustainable planet. So with that, I'd like to turn to Honorable Barry Gardner, who's here with us. So
sure.
Please,
well,
Mr. Gardner, thank you.
Thank you, and I think the video that we started with showed us very graphically that there are many, many reasons for adopting a more plant-based diet. Yes, of course, we can focus here at the COP on climate, but actually this is about achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. It's about the way in which we treat other beings in our society. And so I think the video set us off on a very good path. And Sabrina's absolutely right. She gave a number of the statistics. So what I want to do is maybe talk about the changes that have taken place. Because if you look over the last 50 years, meat production is now 3 times what it was 50 years ago. And you know, when Sabrina was talking about the oil and gas industry and the methane emissions from that, who would know that, you know, animals fart more than the oil and gas industry does, you know, and that's what we're talking about. We can talk about it politely, we can talk about it as enteric fermentation emissions, but that's what it is. We all recognize it, and for those who are tuning in who are lay members who don't sort of investigate these things, why is methane so important? Yeah, it only lasts in the atmosphere for a shorter time, but it has a far greater forcing power in terms of global warming. And that's why it is so critical that we do something about the level of methane emissions. So what can we do? And what are the things that have been set out? And you know, I think the Global Methane Agreement that Sabrina alluded to from last week, yes, it focuses too much simply on the oil and gas sector and the leakage and the emissions coming from that. And we really do need to understand that 40% of methane emissions are actually coming from agriculture and from livestock. And so we really have to address that. The way in which people are thinking of tackling this seems to me to rely too much on the sort of technological fixes. You know, putting additives in animals' feedstock in order to reduce emissions. Ultimately, this is trying to put a sticking plaster on what is the main issue, and that is how do we reduce meat consumption? How do we actually reduce that, the way in which our diets are so heavily based in meat? And it is quite shocking to think that some places in the world are consuming just over 1 kilogram of meat on average a year, and yet others in the developed world are eating 78 kilograms of meat a year. Now, if anything shows global inequity, if anything shows the gap that exists in wealth and the problems that may be storing up as certain parts of the world become wealthier and maybe move to a more meat-based diet, then the consequences of this are really quite frightening. Because you can either choose to intensify your agricultural production, and unfortunately, you know, I've sat around in meetings in Parliament and indeed in government where the chief scientific advisors have been saying, we have to intensify our farming production. No, we don't. We actually have to change the system. It's not good enough to just stick a patch on it. I think we need also to talk about the public's response and the way in which we can influence public opinion. In the UK, we've got the first national food strategy that we've had in 75 years. Just come out this year, really important document, but doesn't, I think, focus enough on procurement and the way in which we need to be procuring a greater element of plant-based foods in our diet. How do we support restaurants? How do we support suppliers to calculate the carbon footprint that's embedded in what they're selling to us as the public? Now, that can be through better labeling, but also we need to facilitate those suppliers to know what the carbon footprint is. And of course, we also need to look at the way in which the labeling of that happens and takes place. And I was very disappointed. I supported a private member's bill in Parliament earlier this year. It was a cross-party initiative. It was actually by a Conservative colleague, Chris Grayling, who put forward the initiative. I supported that for better labelling on that. the government rejected it. And so I do think there are a number of ways in which we need to be educating people and enabling them to take better decisions, and unfortunately that's not happening. We've got to engage consumers, and that means taking the public with us. It is about education, but it's also about the way in which we look at the finance sector. And if you look at, earlier this week we were talking about the ways in which deforestation in the Amazon is caused by the ranching and the beef production there, eroding the rainforest. Hugely problematic, turning the Amazon from a sink into a source of emissions. But who's financing that? Well, actually, the biggest financiers of the two largest beef companies in the Amazon are actually in the UK. So we have to look at this at a structural level, as well as simply saying, oh, well, people must make these individual choices for themselves. So I think there are so many ways that public policy needs to be addressing the issue. You know, I'll leave it there because there are many others who are going to contribute specifically. But it's great to be part of this conversation. I think it's a really important part of the whole way in which we look at climate change and the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals. And unfortunately, it's a part that is too neglected.
Yeah, and thank you so much for reminding us about the SDGs. Hugely important, right, in terms of equity and justice. And also, there was a UN Food Systems Summit this year, not even that many months ago, and several of our organizations and many others, obviously, were part of that. And yet it seems to be a gap between taking the real outcomes of that summit, which was a UN summit, to the climate conference. But I think some of those silos are breaking down. But as you say, they still exist, a strange sort of cow in the room, as we saw in the video. So with that, okay, let me turn now to Julia Tranchon from ProVeg, and we look forward to your intervention as well. I think you're going to talk a bit more about some of the bold ideas and action out there. So
thanks. Thank you, Mia, and everyone to be there today. First, I would also like to thank the UNFCCC to give us the opportunity to speak, especially when food and agriculture topics are still so absent from the current climate agenda. I think it's even more important that we have a space to speak about our ideas and policy. I've been working for ProVeg International for about 3 years now, and I switched to UN advocacy a few months ago. It has been challenging but interesting to see how all this works, and I'm very happy to sit here today to talk about food systems. Just shortly about ProVeg, we are a food awareness organization working to transform the global food system by replacing animal-based products with plant-based and culture alternatives. Our goal is to reduce the global consumption of animal products by 50% until the year 2040. We work together with decision-making bodies, companies, investors, the media, and also the general public to help the world transition to a society and economy that are less reliant on animal agriculture and sustainable for all humans, animals, and our planet. So, yeah, it's maybe an ambitious goal, but I would answer not ambitious enough. When we hear almost nowhere about the big issue that is industrial agriculture, I want to say no more omissions. We want transparency. But I'm here today to present solutions to transition into sustainable food system. Indeed, we are at a moment in climate history where we do not need more talks. We need to create the solution and alternative to preserve our resources, our environment, and future generations. And ProVeg International wants to be part of that. We have been working hard in developing those, and in the time I have today, I would like to present you one in particular, the Smart Protein Project. So the Smart Protein Project is a 10 million euro project funded by the European Union. It seeks to develop a new generation of foods that are cost-effective, resource-efficient, and nutritious. Moreover, the project is a partnership between more than 30 external partners, including universities, research institutions, corporations, small and medium-sized enterprises, and NGOs. So why start Smart Protein? Well, we do not only need to reduce our animal products consumption, but we also need to create the alternative to facilitate the transition for most of the consumers. Alternative protein sources are desperately needed if we are if we are to seriously address some of the most urgent challenges posed by the global food systems in terms of climate change, environmental degradation, food security, and public health. So Smart Proteins aims to develop these alternatives in a way that will be respectful both to our planet and our health. What would be this protein made of, do you ask? I mean, you're not asking, but I'm asking. They will be extracted from natural products such as chickpeas, lentils, fava beans, and quinoa, from new ingredients as yeast and fungi, and through the upcycling of waste stream foods such as pasta residues or bread crust, which allows the creation of a circular economy model. All the smart proteins will be used to create ingredients and products which are environmentally friendly and a part of a secure and future-proof supply chain. Potential products and ingredients could include new forms of plant-based meat, fish, seafood, and baked goods, also cheese or dairy products. Well, you're thinking, great idea, great project, but where are we right now? Well, Smart Protein is a 4-year project, and it started in January 2020 already, so almost 2 years ago. But we are expecting to have the first wave of product in or around 2025. But for now, the different Smart Protein stakeholders have been working on scientific and market research, showing that alternative proteins have potential and are also attractive to consumers. And the next step is actually our report coming out today on consumers' acceptance. What do consumers want? A European survey on consumer attitudes toward plant-based foods with a focus on flexitarians. According to this report, 46% of European consumers have already significantly reduced their meat consumption. So if you want to know more, do not hesitate to reach out to us, have a look on the website, or catch up with our team during the conference. We'll be there until Friday. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Juliette. That was great. And also, I think it reminds us that many people are really open to this and interested in this. And this is an opportunity to create more fair food systems, to farm better, more equitably, not have so much destruction and devastation and exploitation. So thank you for that. That was great, very pithy. You did a great job. Okay, so I'd like to turn now to Karina Millstone, who runs Feedback, and she's an analyst, a writer, a campaigner, and really looking forward to hearing her presentation. So Karina, over to you.
Thank you so much, Mia. I'm really delighted to be here. I think I'd just like to make 3 points, I think, in terms of my understanding of where we're at with this meat and climate agenda, my analysis or my views on why we're where we're at, and then what I think it means for those of us who want to do something about it, essentially. So where are we at? Well, my sense in all these discussions is that meat is somehow becoming the new frontier of climate denial. I mean, everyone seems to now agree that we need to do something about climate change, but people are ready to deny we need to do anything about meat. We know, incredibly, that meat's contributed about 1/5 of all warming since the Industrial Revolution. This is huge. We know that we need to reduce meat to meet our climate targets. And yet, the silence in these negotiations on meat and on food systems more generally has been deafening. If you think of the NDCs, they're quiet on the issue of food and agriculture and diets, just no mention of them. You look at the IPCC reports, they speak about meat as a high-emitting industry. And that's taken as a given, an industry that can't be decarbonized, agriculture cannot be decarbonized, and will need to be offset. And actually, rather than exploring alternatives such as changing diets. So we're really in a moment where there is denial. In fact, earlier this week, US Secretary for Agriculture said actually Americans can keep on producing meat and eating meat, no problem here. So it's really denial of evidence. And I think we really need to ask ourselves, why is this happening? Why are people either lying or in terms of their worldview, they're interpreting the evidence in a way that suits their worldview. So why do I think it's happening? Well, my offer on this is that meat presents some real challenges to some fundamental tenets of our beliefs about our economic system. The idea of reducing meat is really problematic for where we're at the moment in terms of a capitalist, extractivist economy. Reducing meat on the production side would essentially mean shrinking a bunch of corporations. I mean, that's what it comes down to. A few dozen corporations that control the global meat economy. There's about 35 of them. And what does reducing meat mean? Well, it means a planned process to shrink those corporations and possibly end them. And I think this is a huge for policymakers, ending an industry. I mean, this is a real leap, especially an industry that is global and integrated into global finance, with, of course, huge global financial interests coming out of the City of London and New York and elsewhere. Our research at Feedback showed, for example, that these top 35 meat corporations that control the meat economy benefited from 478 billion pounds in dollars, sorry, 478 billions in financial backing in the terms of loans and underwriting and credit facilities and so on in the last 5 years. So there's huge vested interests in keeping this system in place, this extractive, growth-based economy. On the consumption side, it's also a big challenge because reducing meat, saying we need to eat less, challenges another fundamental principle of the capitalist system. It challenges the notion of consumer choice. Politicians want to be increasing consumer choice, and the idea of decreasing consumer choice is very, very difficult to stomach. So actually, you see all sorts of euphemisms about encouraging healthy and sustainable diets and a real reluctance to say what it is. We're talking about the need for policy interventions, hard interventions to reduce meat consumption. And this is all the more baffling that we know that in high-income industrialized countries, such as the UK, that we eat way too much meat compared to the NHS's own Eat Well guidelines. So surely there would be a government, legitimacy for government intervention, or at least on health grounds, if not on environmental and climate ones. But what we have is, by and large, a political class that's unwilling to challenge growth, extraction, the creation of financial value, and consumer choice, unwilling to tackle these deep structural issues. So what we get instead are kind of, token efficiency measures, talking about, yes, maybe more additives in feed, as Barry mentioned, when actually that's neither here nor there if these efficiency gains are going to be wiped out by the growth of the industry. And not only that, a lot of cattle is actually pasture-fed anyway, so it doesn't apply necessarily. We get huge investor enthusiasm for fake meat and cell ag and alternative proteins and all of this for the techno fix. But actually, it turns out that meat is not a problem in need of a technical solution, right? We already know what the solution is. They are plant-based proteins that already exist and already exist at scale. And never mind the fact that this whole techno fix and cell meat and so on will just further corporatize the food system and erode food sovereignty. So all this for me, really, in terms of what to do about this, I think for me, we need to think very carefully here as activists, as myself as an activist, as to what kind of change do we want to be asking for. And I think we can learn here a lot from the fossil fuel movement. The fossil fuel activists, in my view, wasted decades, unfortunately, talking about individual behavior change, as if the fossil fuel and the energy crisis was going to be solved by wearing an extra jumper or turning your heating down. And for me, this is the equivalent of asking people to reduce meat for a day a week, for example. These are tokenistic individual measures that do not address the structural forces at play. And so also on the investor side, I think it's really important to see that many years were wasted in terms of the fossil fuel transition with this whole notion that fossil fuel companies could become the renewable energy providers of the future. I'm thinking about Beyond Petroleum, for example, this idea that these big companies could transition to become renewable energy providers rather than fossil fuel companies. This was clearly just an exercise in greenwashing, which we are now seeing happening with the big meat companies. So what has been effective for fossil fuels? Well, I think it's been holding a radical flank line. And by this, I mean really saying it as it is, that these meat corporations need to end, and calling for divestment from these corporations, calling for defunding from them, delegitimizing. There is no role and no place for meat, industrial meat and dairy, in a fair, sustainable, regenerative world. I think that's something that needs to be said loud and clear all the time. And maybe just to maybe end on just a thought I had just this morning. It seems to me partly the reluctance of talking about meat is because it speaks to something a lot broader than the climate crisis. Meat is really about the extinction crisis, you know, the extinction crisis of species and the extinction crisis eventually of humans, the kind of the existential threat posed by our exploitation of the natural world and the plunder of the planet. And I'm hopeful that by addressing meat, by really holding the line that we need to move to a fair, equitable, compassionate food system, we can both help to meet our Paris targets, but also help to start renegotiating our relationship to the natural world. Thank you.
Thank you, Karina. Thank you also for bringing up the natural world, the non-human world, which many of us, of course, hugely care about, and our whole lives are reliant on that as well. So thank you for bringing those home truths. I'm thinking some of those could actually be quite good billboards, quite pungent, pungent and effective at the same level, and the absolute need for structural change in some of these seemingly sacred cows, and yet are they really sacred cows, and should they remain sacred cows? One thing at the COP some of us have noted is a real interest in trying to merge biodiversity and climate agendas, and I think there is, well, that's huge, but I think there's potential for, again, showing the science, showing the truth, showing the demand from the public, showing the opportunities, showing the realities of the devastating cycle that we're in. So thank you so much for that. Okay, I just want to give a shout out to the online audience that after a few more short presentations, we will go to audience questions points. So if people want to start queuing up on the system, I think it's quite user-friendly to put their hand up. Yes, so I think it's something like a Zoom system, but not quite a Zoom. So hopefully you will see that on there. I know they're a very skilled team here. Okay, and also we'll hear from youth climate activists in a couple minutes, because I think, again, in the youth climate movement, there's a very, very strong moral vision, and something like meat corporations exploiting the planet and fueling the climate and biodiversity crises is viewed very, very skeptically in that setting as well. So I want to turn to our last presenter here in the room, who's Ashley Yong from the Tzu Chi Foundation. She is from Malaysia. She's based in the US, but we're thrilled that she's here in Glasgow with us. So Ashley, over to you.
Thank you. So I'm Ashley Yong. I'm originally from Malaysia, and I'm representing Buddhist Tzu Chi Foundation. And at the same time, I'm also part of the United Nations Global Department of Global Communications Civil Society Unit Youth Steering Committee. Yeah, so very happy to be here today to share about how faith-based organization can contribute to plant-based promotion, and especially in platforms like COP. So as we know, society grows wealthier, and when the population keeps growing, it is expected that the diet of the world's population will be shifting towards higher calorie and also animal-based food. And I believe, like all of us understand, that this is not sustainable, and we don't have enough land to support all the poultry, the meat that we need to feed the 9.7 billion people that is expected to be living on the earth by 2050. So no matter how the world changes or transforms, the principles and values of the faith and religious organizations do not change. So they could serve as a strong support for living, no matter how the world became and also to mitigate global issues that we face. So I'm a Buddhist follower and have been learning about Buddhism in my organization for at least 10 years now. And there are many principles that Buddhism teach, and one of the basic disciplinary principles is called 10 precepts. So the first precept is about no killing. So from here we can see that while we eat meat, we see it as these animals were killed to fulfill our desire. And this is contradict with Buddhist principles. So for Buddhist Tzu Chi Foundation, it is very important to adopt a plant-based diet. And aside from the environmental consequences of animal agriculture, we have got data from UNFAO, and we calculated that each second there are about 2,443 animals being killed for human consumption. And each day there are 86,400 seconds, so meaning that in a day over 211 million animals are slaughtered. And in a year time, we actually slaughtered more than 77 billion animals, and it's only for human consumption. So through the adoption of plant-based diet, Buddhists also learn to cultivate compassion and loving kindness, while also learn to be grateful for the services and the resources that the Mother Earth provided to us. And the ability to translate the Buddhist compassion and loving kindness into individual and organization action, for instance, like manifesting compassion through our sustainable diet, plant-based diet, is something that we believe it's very useful for our, to further promote positive individual and systemic change in addressing food system and climate change issues. And as 84% of the world population are identified with faith or religion, we believe that faith-based groups are definitely a great mover in mobilizing the community for plant-based diet promotion and also to transform food system as a means to reduce carbon emission. So from developed countries like the United States, UK, or Singapore to some other developing regions, Tzu Chi has been successfully promoting plant-based diet by integrating the faith, compassion, and other values to scientific data of climate change. So in many other countries, like my home country, Malaysia, many people perceive plant-based diet as a religious practice, but not as an environmental concern. So we think that faith-based organizations can be a wonderful player in educating the people on the benefits of plant-based diet in terms of its relation to religion and also to sustainability values. And Tzu Chi's roles in encouraging personal consumption transformation towards more compassionate and sustainable diet have also seen success in different populations, from the children, the youth, and the elderly. So we believe that the cultivation of faith values is a very important investment among the population to enable positive change that could contribute to a greater community welfare, as well as to bring peace to all living beings in the planet. And faith also sees partnership as an important element in enhancing adoption of positive values. And these values are very beneficial for both bottom-up or top-down approaches in addressing carbon emission from the production and consumption patterns of human beings. So like in Tzu Chi, we establish hospitals and universities for its missions to perform charity or to save lives, but the expertise of the medical professionals have supplemented the health and scientific perspectives of meat and plant-based diet along with carbon reduction. So like going plant-based is an act of compassion and kindness towards all sentient beings, but we also understand that it is helpful for both our bodies and the environment. So the hospital that Tzu Chi established also provided only plant-based food, which could ensure the nutrition balance of the patients and to ensure low carbon contribution of the hospital, as well as for the greater benefit of the Mother Earth. So this is what a faith organization can do, and this is how important it is to incorporate faith values into our daily actions. And it is also important for different faith and religion to work together. Although we are a Buddhist organization, we do work with different religions, including the Catholic, the Christians, the Muslims, and through various platforms to address global issues like climate change, environmental degradation, and gender inequality. We believe that upholding the principle of coexisting with the earth is not only Buddhist, but the fundamental belief of all faith and religions. And this is very important to drive sustainable and climate-friendly behaviors among the society. So like in the recent UN Food Systems Summit, we also work with various faith groups and come together to generate a joint statement to call for action to all their followers and the community to understand few key principles. So the first one is on the interdependence on human and the planet, and also the truth of science, the reverence of ethics, the respect of traditions, compassion on all sentient beings, solidarity as we only have one planet, and also the empowerment for resilience. So together we can see that faith-based organizations are indeed an important player to mobilize transformation in the community. And we really hope that all stakeholders can walk the talk and can mainstreaming plant-based diets in all corners of the world, and never underestimate the power of individual consumption practices and also the potential of faith-based organizations. Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you so much. That was a wonderful presentation. I appreciate you bringing the ethical frame to this, and also the role of faith-based organizations, institutions, as well as even things like purchasing for a hospital. You know, Barry also talked about procurement and needs to think about that and shift that in a much more positive and also climate-compatible direction. So thank you so much, Ashley. That was wonderful. Okay, so we have two more presenters, so we will go to the screen. Our colleagues are here. Nick Palmer from Compassion World Farming we'll hear from first, and then we'll head to Lana Weidgannon from Zero Hour, and then we will come back hopefully to questions from you all out there. So please, again, raise your hand in the chat function online. And Nick, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and hello, everyone. I just want to make 2 points. First, I think we need to see governments committing to the principle of meat reduction, and so far they really haven't. In Britain, the National Food Strategy by Henry Dimbleby recommends a reduction of 30% over 10 years. Now, we can argue that this is too little, but the important issue is that the government actually accepts the principle that meat consumption in the developed world is too high and needs to come down. And we can argue about the percentages, but we need that point of principle made. And it's important to stress that this is for the developed world, because that's where the overwhelming majority of meat consumption is happening. I think it'd be actually insulting if we sit in Britain or America and say, you guys in Botswana, you need to eat less meat. The problem is with us, and we need to tackle it. Secondly, we need to have realism about how it's done. We need to make it work for low-income groups, and we need to make it work for farmers. That means that we need active government support for healthy plant-based alternatives, reflecting the real environmental impact of meat. And in the end, I believe that we will need to balance that with a meat tax. If we only rely on education and appeals to idealism, the change that we need is really not going to happen. And I think the National Food Strategy proposal in Britain falls short on that. It says we need to do it through procurement, through education, through persuasion. These are all good things, but I don't think they'll do them on their own. Now, most people are a little bit pragmatic. I don't think we have populations sharply divided into people who are totally vegan and people who do nothing but eat meat. Most people today eat a mixture, and we need to combine education and public campaigning, as we've all said, with a change in the financial arguments to encourage a steady change of consumption, which in turn will encourage companies to change to meet the new demand. Because if we're honest, companies in the end don't care what we eat. They want to know what we want. If we make it worth their while, they will suddenly turn into zealous providers of plant-based alternatives. And we already see meat companies putting money into meat alternatives because they want to cover their bets. They want to make sure that they don't lose out if that's the way the market moves. And that raises the question that some of my colleagues on the panel put: do we actually need to end the capitalist system in order to make progress? And I'd like to be slightly controversial here, just so we have a discussion. For those who know my left-wing political background, you might expect me to say yes, but honestly, I don't think we can afford to wait for that. We need to reduce meat consumption immediately over the next years, and we need to do that in parallel with whatever political system and change we favor. I think that's essential for all of us, for our planet and for our society. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Nick. Thank you also for bringing up the issue of subsidies and government policy. I know the UN Environment Program did an interesting report in the lead up to this COP about agricultural subsidies and how it's something like 500 billion that has been spent in the last decade on really destructive agricultural practices. And those really could be shifted to something much more sustainable, equitable, and plant-based, plant-forward in many parts of the world and benefit farmers as well. So, okay, great. Thank you for the potential controversy. We'll see if it comes up in some of the questions, but that's always good. And our final speaker now, Lana Weidgannon, who works with Zero Hour, is a youth climate activist, was very involved in the leadership of the UN Food Systems Summit, and is active here in Glasgow with a group called Food at COP, which is a youth-led initiative as well. So, Lana, over to you. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much. And thank you to all the wonderful contributions that have already been made. Nick made 2 points. I'll make 3 quick points. One of which is the outcomes from the UN Food Systems Summit. So I know it can be difficult to track all of these different UN mechanisms and conferences and processes. So I'll just quickly go over some of what came from that 1.5 year lead up to the UN Food Systems Summit that happened recently. One of the main outcomes, of course, is the coalitions. And there was a coalition launched on healthy, sustainable diets. So that's definitely a space to look out for. It's called Healthy Diets from Sustainable Food Systems, which was how we could bring forward that agenda point past the summit. And there's also some areas to look out for around a coalition on sustainable livestock, and to watch and make sure that that is going in the right direction as well. And a number of other coalitions that you can find on the UN Food Systems Summit website. The use of coalitions in this sense is where countries will be coming together to take action around that topic area. So this is how this work is going to be moving forward. And more broadly speaking, the UN Food Systems Summit was also a very important acknowledgement that food needs to be tackled on a systems level, and that is a massive, important agenda point for us to bring forward. The fact that the United Nations Secretary General convened this summit is extremely important in acknowledging how critical this is, and to help us bring this topic into spaces such as COP26. It was also wasn't just another nutrition or zero hunger. Of course, that was part of it, and that is critically important, but it was also talking about how food needs to remain within planetary boundaries and also not make the climate crisis worse, which has been in the past a bit of 2 siloed issues. Finally, I'd like to mention on the Food Systems Summit that it helped to amplify the youth position in food systems. I was one of the youth vice chairs for the summit. There were also young people engaged in a variety of different ways, such as through the Champions Network and Youth Liaisons Group. And that engagement is going to be moving forward, become more concrete and continued, such as through the World Food Forum, to make sure that young people continue to have a voice at the center of food systems. So I would consider that a very important step. And the involvement of young people, quickly bring in as well, is extremely important, not only because young people are the future, but also because of the work that we are already doing today. Of course, we'll have to live the longest with the decisions being made today. And I think the young person from Malaysia also spoke to this importantly. But we're also making critical contributions in food systems and climate justice right now. Another point that isn't brought up often around why young people need to have a voice in these spaces is also because you're able to think past the way that things have always been done and just the way things are, and tend to be more visionary and able to imagine a different world because we're not so stuck to the way that for instance, food systems or any other aspect of our society has to function. And for instance, with 0 Hour, this has allowed us to be more intersectional and bold than if we were working through, for instance, a larger adult-led organization. I also want to use this opportunity to highlight some of the youth initiatives that we've been bringing forward here. Food at COP was just mentioned, and Food at COP was an international youth-led effort to have food systems impact on climate change acknowledged through 100% plant-based, climate-friendly catering at COP26. Ultimately, there was a commitment for 50%, and we will be checking if that is truly 50% as well, but continuing that advocacy to ensure that there is an understanding in these spaces that food is a critical contributor to the climate crisis and that the catering aligns with the climate action. So we're also going to be advocating for that into the agenda, for instance, in the NDCs and through Coronivia, and also in the catering of COP27, for instance. Two other initiatives I'd like to quickly mention is I for Food, Act for Change, a youth pledge of over 100,000 young people, bringing forward that we need to address food systems, and also a youth open letter specifically asking COP26 and future global fora to talk about healthy, sustainable diets, completely overlooked even more than food systems in Coronivia, in the NDCs, and these UN processes. And young people are saying that this is completely not acceptable. My final statement is that I am so glad to be in this side event, and there are so many amazing side events happening on food at COP26, which we did not see so much in previous UN climate conferences. There were perhaps a few that you could count on your hands, and now there are a massive number of amazing side events happening. But we also need to have food and agriculture addressed in the main program of the COP as one of the main focuses, because this is such a massive contributor. Of course, fossil fuels is one of the biggest as well, but this is a close second, and we cannot be only talking about this on the side. It needs to be on the main stage. Thank you so much, and looking forward to the questions.
Thank you so much, Lana, also for giving us that comprehensive vision and all those really terrific work and questions and initiatives that you and many other youth activists are working on, and also to mention the food here at COP, which is, we'll see how it goes, right? I mean, in the menu items, it gives us a carbon calculation, and yet there's still some that are quite high and some that are quite low, and you sort of wonder, why are the high ones here? But just to underline what Lana has said, it can seem like a bit of a catering decision. How important is it? And yet it models, if we're here to solve a climate crisis, you know, we're not driving SUVs, and well, we shouldn't be, right? I mean, and so having the food be much more climate compatible and also just, if possible, is an important aspect of the COP. So, okay, so I'd like to go to some questions from the floor, and again, to remind people, they can raise their hand in the chat function. I see we have a question from Janine Muller. And Janine, I think you'll be unmuted, and you can ask your question to everyone on the panel, one speaker. We'll see how many questions we can get in, how many comments we can get, how many replies. So I think, Jean, we'll see you on the screen.
Yes, hello everyone. I hope you can hear me properly.
Oh, we could hear you.
Around me, so I'll try my best. Okay, that's great. So thank you everyone for your inspirational talks. Yeah, it was great to hear well, what is on the table and where we're headed and what everyone needs to know. I wish there were more people here to discuss this, and I'm really hoping that well, I feel like the food sector often remains undiscussed when it comes to climate change, so I hope that will change in the next couple of days and with the coming conferences as well. So I'm working as a climate protection manager on a local level for a community in Germany, and my question to all of you basically would be, what can we do on a local community level, apart from education and information about the footprint of meat and dairy consumption and, well, plant-based proteins as a solution? What could I do to, well, make a change in our city, really?
What is some action at the local level, municipal level, that people working in a local government or even a citizen can help to bring about some of the change that many of the panelists have spoken about here? So I don't know, why doesn't everyone who'd like to jump in on that? Barry, maybe start with you since you are an elected official.
Yeah, very happy. Yeah. Janine, thanks for your question and really good to focus us down and get some positive answers. I think at a local level, one of the things that I would like to see is local authority. Oh, she's gone. Or is she still there? No, she's still there. She just went off that screen.
Yeah, she's on a bus or a train,
on a different
right?
Screen now. There
she's in public transit, which is great for beaming in.
I would really like to see local government, local authorities, schools, changing the procurement of the food that they give to children. Because actually we're educating children to eat the wrong things, and what we need to be doing is educating them in a different diet. And so I think that power of procurement is actually really important. A number of years ago, when I was a minister in the Environment Department, we changed the procurement for timber in the UK. And we said that all government procurement had to be legally sourced. It had to be certified as legal. Now, government procurement was 25% of all the timber that was coming into the UK. So what did the companies do? They said, well, if we've got to do it for 25%, we may as well do it for everything. And so the power of procurement, particularly if you're looking at local government, can be really, really important because it drives the manufacturers, because they say, well, if we're going to have to do it for this much, we may as well do it across the board. And I think that's one of the ways I think at a local level we could really drive this. It doesn't take, national government to act. You can do this at that local level.
Great. Yeah, Sabrina, please.
Yeah, I would like to echo what Barry has said about the role of public procurement. The Vegan Society have a Catering for Everyone campaign which seeks to legislate for at least one plant-based option on public sector menus. And we have seen a lot of local councils sort of adopt vegan options on their on localised councils. But I would also like to say that, we are bound by, in the UK in particular, by standards that prevent us from going forward, really. And I think we need to really think about public procurement on a national level. I know, in the UK we are looking into this at the moment and really enforce the need for legislation to ensure that, vegan options, for example, plant-based options, more sustainable options, are actually mandated. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, Ashley, would you like to?
I just want to add on the procurement side as well, because like in some of the countries that we have been promoting plant-based diet, we often hear from people that they couldn't go plant-based because they do not have enough resources. They do not have enough plant-based restaurants in their cities. So we think about why shouldn't we try to let the producers know, let the vendors know that plant-based resources, plant-based food are required by the consumers. So we also have launched some campaigns to recruit some restaurants to participate in the campaign to add more plant-based food in their restaurants, in their shops. So I think this is something that the local community can do as well. And also I think it's really important to start among ourselves. Like we talk about not having 100% plant-based food at COP, right? But I think the option is within us. We can choose not to eat the meat-based food that they provided. We can choose the plant-based food. Yeah, so I think this is something that we can do every day, and also to create more impact in our own city and community.
Thank you. Thanks. Yeah, Juliet.
Yeah, I would like to jump in because you also talk about school and education. And at ProVeg, we have several programs, both in the UK and Germany, to help school catering to transition into more sustainable diets. So local cities are local, and local governments can get in touch with us, and we offer free trainings and workshops and also guidelines, and so we're working on that. And in Germany, I think we also work with more public catering, so yeah, we have solution. Yeah.
Yeah, Karina, would you like that?
Sure. I think this is an opportunity to start building more regional and fairer food systems. So at a community level, trying to make links with local farmers, trying to start shopping and procuring food outside of the corporate industrial system. So, for example, through mechanisms such as community-supported agriculture, which we know support plant-based diets, but also support local farmers and generally contribute to local livelihoods. So it's definitely an area, I think, where there is scope for community-level action.
Yeah, please, Barry.
Yeah, there's one other thing, which may sound so obvious that it doesn't need saying, but I think we need to promote recipes. If people don't feel, because certainly I feel in the developed world, people are so used to eating meat with every meal that they haven't got the imagination very often to know how to produce a really tasty, palatable, wonderful meal without using meat. And it's crazy because if you look, at so many parts of the world where meat is not used in the diet, in India, for example, where so much of the food is totally plant-based, yet the variety of food, the variety of recipes, the variety of tastes that you can experience are absolutely wonderful. But I just think we're not educating people and making them feel confident very often to know how to create a really interesting, tasty meal. So recipes and publicizing of that sort of basic information, I think is also quite important.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And nothing is too small to say it's not important, right? And even demonstrating some of that. I mean, certainly in COVID and food insecurity, people were doing more community kitchens and showing how can you have healthy food, how can it be more just, how can it be shared more widely. One other thing, Janine, and we see you on public transit, which is also great, is, we think, it sounds like a very policy wonkish, but policy coherence, right? And so here are national governments at COP and multilateral agencies making commitments. And obviously we're hoping they're going to be extremely bold and in line with what we need. We'll see as the week goes on. But how does that translate to regional levels, to municipal levels, to local levels? And I think in some of that, there are a lot of interesting innovations at city levels. There's something called C40, which is an alliance of mayors from all over the world, including Global South and Global North, around how do we make cities real leaders on climate compatibility, on reducing emissions. And just in the last couple of years, they do have more on food. It started out being more on food waste, but it seems like there's more openness to things around what really is a climate compatible food system and diet. What does that mean for urban agriculture? What does that mean for procurement? And certainly cities are sites of innovation, and we need rural regeneration. We need those links between cities and rural areas. But I think at a local level, municipal level, if that's where you're working, I think to bring, perhaps talk about things like policy coherence. Probably not those words because they're not very interesting words, but how do we make cities more climate resilient, climate compatible? And food and agriculture really has to be central to that. I mean, the science is showing us that, more public interest in that, and even, public deliberation processes. I know in the UK you had this very interesting climate sort of citizen jury. I see more of that happening where, people want to take the time to listen to each other and really discuss how do we move forward, but in a quite comprehensive way that's also rooted in local realities. So I think you've given us a lot of really interesting ideas and food for thought with your questions, so thank you for that. And we hope you get where you're going well and easily on a train or a bus. Okay, and we have a comment from one of our colleagues, Nick Palmer. So Nick, back to you. And I think Nick might be muted. The famous words of our lockdown, muted. Okay, I think you're off mute, Nick, please.
So true. Sorry about that. Yeah, I totally agree with what Barry said about local procurement being a real opportunity here. The only thing is we need to balance it with an overall approach where we actually say the funding for schools and for hospitals also needs to reflect the possibility of providing greater variety and greater plant-based options. Because if we merely say to our education colleagues, you've got to provide this, and we know it's more expensive, but too bad, then they're not going to do it. It needs a coherent approach.
Yeah, great point. And of course, we can ask, why is it more expensive to have plant-based foods often? I mean, there's a real irrationality around that, and the choices government makes, and the subsidies, and the power of industry.
I mean, the fact that most of the people in this world who are living on less than $2 a day are not the ones who are consuming meat shows that it needn't be more expensive, you know. But I think it's really important that we get three figures across, three stats across. 83, 37, and 18, okay? 83% of the farmland globally is producing meat. That meat produces just 37% of the protein that people eat, and it's producing just 18% of the carbohydrates, right? So it is a completely unsustainable equation. 83, 37, 18. We just need to keep those figures in mind to see the extent of the problem. And Nick's right, and what you said about structurally, we have to be able to say, structurally this cannot go on. We have to address the industry here, and we have to change that industry and change the direction of intensification. If we don't do that, we're not going to achieve all the different goals that come together in this whole nexus of climate, poverty, sustainable development goals, biodiversity, ecosystems.
And I think maybe just one quick clarification, it is the 83% includes feed production as well, right?
Yes, of course. Yeah.
So, I mean, there's grazing, but there's enormous amounts of land used to produce corn and soy and other feed crops for factory farmed animals.
Imagine what would happen if actually that feed was not being used to feed animals to feed humans, but was feeding humans directly.
Absolutely, and a more diverse diet. And again, there are some grim data that to eat a healthy, sustainable diet, it's out of reach cost-wise for billions of people around the world. And that is a huge injustice. And as we've made the point, we're using resources in so many ways that are incompatible with the world we need and the world we're living in, but the world we absolutely have to create to sustain life on the planet. So Janine Miller has one other question. So Janine, we'll go to you. If you would ask it relatively quickly, get some quick responses, and then we'll probably move towards giving everyone a few, maybe not minutes, but a little bit of time just to wrap up. So yeah, Janine, please.
Thank you very much. There was plenty of valuable, advice for my work in the city where I work. I'm actually not in public transport. I'm at COP26 as well, so maybe just 100 meters away from you. But
excuse me, I thought motion. Yes, okay, go ahead. Sorry. Yeah.
Oh, sorry. Can you hear me properly? Okay.
Please continue.
So I just wanted to give a little feedback on the procurement part, because at least in Germany, the case is that in procurement, especially when it comes to ordering food where it would make sense, you're not allowed to put any factor in that includes like local businesses and local food. So actually our city ended up having a firm deliver food that is like over an hour away, because we weren't allowed, like the law didn't allow to put in the factor a business that is close and can deliver the food without causing too much emissions. So there's something that has to change on that law level as well to make it possible to be sustainable and climate friendly when it comes to procurement. So I will try my best, but in that sense, I can't really do much about it. Thank you.
Yeah, it might be valuable to even just raise that question, right? Because that's also part of a kind of policy coherence as well. I mean, in terms of, how do things align with emissions goals and reduction goals too? But in any case, thank you for being here. And sorry, I thought you were in public transit, but Janine is down the hall in this quite large place where we are in COP26. Okay, so I don't think we have any more questions from the floor. So I would like to give all of our panelists at least just a little bit of time. I don't know, maybe 30 seconds for what you'd like to leave a message with. Okay, less than that. Okay, let's do a very rapid round. Queen of Saudi, like 10 seconds. What's the message you want to leave?
10 seconds. Let's not focus on individual behaviour change. Let's really get on the streets. Let's ask our politicians to make this happen. We need to eat less meat for climate, for biodiversity.
It has to be structural. We have to make sure that the subsidies are not going in the wrong direction, because if we don't do that, we're not going to change the structure of the industry. And exactly as you say, it cannot only be personal. We have to do this at a structural government level.
Absolutely, yeah. Juliet?
Yeah, and we already have solutions, so actually we can do it.
That's a great message for today. We can do it, right? It seems like a heavy lift sometimes when we're here in the COP building itself, but yeah, we can do it. Okay, Sabrina.
We need consistent leadership, greater leadership. We need food sustainability laws that actually embed the commitments that we're making, and we need greater investment in protein production.
Okay, Ashley, very quick.
Even COP serves you meat, but you can always choose to be plant-based starting today.
Okay, Lana, very quick, and then I think we got to wrap. I'm sorry, Nick, we're giving a last word to the youth.
So young people are already acting on this. We just ask you to act with us.
Okay, and on that note, thank you so much, everyone. Thanks so much to all the speakers. It was really terrific, and thanks to the audience, and thanks to the team here in the room.